Hello, are you there? Are we connected? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this deep dive into Chapter 1 of Deltarune. It's been a long time coming, and I thought since Chapter 5 is about to drop tomorrow, I said let's start revisiting the older chapters with this new information in mind. But, of course, we can't really do any kind of deep dive without first discussing what's going to be happening. So, of course, this is meant to be kind of an in-depth review of the game and everything that's happening. So, obviously, huge spoilers for all of Deltarune so far. So, if you haven't played it already, please do so before looking at this. Now, the plan is that we're going to revisit each chapter one by one and kind of discuss everything that we notice in the game based on what we've learned in the later chapters. Normally, I'll obviously wait until after playing chapter 5 as well, but we still have one day to wait. Plus, there's one small thing that only happens when you're playing a fresh copy of the game. So I wanted to show that part as well before I obviously load the game with chapter 5 in mind. So, without further ado, let's go there. Alright, so the first thing that the game asks you, when you load it up for the first time, it'll ask you, would you like to start from chapter 1? And obviously in this case, we're going to say yes. And then you're prompted with this screen. Now, this doesn't really look, and you'll see it later, this really doesn't look like the normal game at all, honestly. It actually looks more like a Windows 95 program, but probably sitting a bit better at the bitrate. So this is the first part that really needs to be a bit analyzed in detail already. I know we're not even haven't started the game yet and we're already going to go deep into it. So first things first, for those of you that know Undertale well, and if you're since you're interested in Deltarune, I'm going to assume that you already have at least a familiar knowledge of Undertale. One of the things that you'll notice is that in Undertale there is this kind of big hanging open question related to who was this royal scientist before Alphys. The community has tended to call him Gaster, and honestly, in Undertale at least, he's a very enigmatic figure. Um, there's a whole entire topic that we can't really deep dive now that's just related to ways in which you can encounter him, or at least some of his so-called followers, also named Gunners. But basically, the idea is that you need to have certain values in one variable that is in the Undertale game. So basically, when you start Undertale for the first time, you'll be assigned one of these so-called fun values at random between 0 and 100. And only one single fun value will lead you to actually see Gaster in Undertale as a game. So obviously, a lot of speculation has been made. These kind of meant, at least in Undertale, to kind of be an homage to this kind of idea of, creepypasta and other, kind of like horror content in otherwise semi-normal games. But of course, we're talking about Undertale and Flowy, so that kind of horror part is already covered, at least. So obviously there's been a lot of speculation about what does he mean for the game, and especially as we moved on to Deltarune, there was a lot of speculation about, who is, we'll see after we choose one save file, who is this mysterious voice at the start of the game? Who do they represent? What do they mean? When Chapter 1 was initially released as a standalone and in October on Halloween of all days, people actually thought, is this meant to be some kind of funny small horror game that will be released out of the blue with no context? And of course, when they realize it's an entire game, and an entire game that at the start looks a lot of similarities with Undertale, it has led people to speculate that, is this like a continuation of Undertale, a parallel universe? Is it a prequel? What does it mean? What are we being shown here? And of course, inevitably, the question is, well, if there are all of these similarities to Undertale, does this also apply to Gaster? Is Gaster also present in Deltarune? And of course, as we look here, again, we have this very Spartan menu that's supposed to let you choose a save. So let's go into it and then let's discuss a bit more about it. But the basic idea is, and keep this in mind, why do we have this very primitive start screen, so to speak, when you start a new game from scratch? Especially if you try, for example, to do things like, oh, choose the one to copy. So be very careful at these manners of speech that you have here. Like this isn't your, again, usual DOS program or something. Or here, select the one to erase. But there was nothing left to erase. So as you can see, there's very interesting flavor text given here. Like this isn't just, again, a very generic save load menu. Even the choosing of words like erase, it's not delete, erase. Like it's very clear here that it's meant to evoke a certain kind of personality of the person who created this program. Because inevitably, right, especially for things that are done by one person, be it any kind of program or game, you can kind of inevitably see some of their personalities start to bleed too. So let's choose, for example, slot 3 and begin. Are you there? Are we connected? Excellent. Truly excellent. Now, we may begin. First, you must create a vessel. Select the head that you prefer. Okay, getting obviously a bit out in character there. So going back through what we just saw, because we couldn't pause mid-sentence. As you can see, the kind of same personality, or at least a personality that's very similar to the one that had that very Spartan start menu, just spoke apparently to us. Now again, there's speculation what this us might be, but it's probably referring to us, the player trying to play Deltarune. So again, based on their manner of speech and way of referring things, and even the pauses that they tend to prefer, again, current, let's say, community consensus, or at least community understanding as a whole, is that this is Gaster speaking to us. So there is this idea of what does Gaster want in the Deltarune universe? Because in Undertale, at least, whilst there's a bit of speculation of what exactly happened to him, what he wanted to do was pretty clear. He was experimenting with monsters and with human determination. He created a determination extraction machine that Alphys later uses. So in a way, you could say that a lot of things that are horrifying that we see in True Lab and Undertale is pretty clearly related to Gaster, actually, not Alphys necessarily. Alphys was more the person that continued his work once he, let's say, somehow got out of the picture. So again, since a lot of the characters that were in Undertale obviously have looked pretty different to what they were here in Deltarune, the same thing applies to Gaster. Is he different? If he isn't, why isn't he like everyone else? And if he is, what kind of motives or, let's say, agenda does he have in Deltarune? Well, I mean, at least at the start, he seems to be pretty upfront of what he wants from us, the player. He wants us to create a vessel. Now, again, it's very interesting, and you'll see this often with most things related to Gaster. It's very interesting the kind of turns of phrases that he uses. Like, he doesn't say, create a character or, create who you're going to be playing as. He very specifically uses the word vessel. Not a very common word, so obviously the choice of word is very important here. A vessel, you could think, is something like a cup or a bowl, right? Like something that holds a certain content. Usually liquid, obviously, but not always. And again, obviously, if we think to what direction the story goes, we are pretty sure that in this case, Chris is the vessel in Deltarune, at least. And it's interesting that at the start, Gaster almost wants us to create our own vessel instead of using Chris. Like, instead of using someone that already exists in the world, let us create someone, whoever we desire. Well, from the limited options that we are given, of course. But in practice, it's not that simple, right? Because for most people, especially playing the first time, something even as simple as creating a character can be a very agonizing process. A lot of people might stay here for a long time thinking, oh, a lot of these characters are pretty interesting, like almost each of these faces, even in their simple graphics, kind of tell a different story. Who do I identify with the most? Although, shout out to Mr. Baldy here. He hasn't had a great life, it seems, so far. But everyone else, they look similar, but different enough to give you some pause. And of course, again, knowing who we're going to actually play as, they do have some resemblance to Chris, although none of them are actually Chris's head if you take a good look at them. So it's interesting that, again, whatever Gaster wants from us, they're not curious to see if we would create someone like Chris by our own volition or by random chance. They're not interested in that, at least. So let's go with this one. Select the torso that you prefer. Here indeed you can see that it is a bit more similar to Chris in the sense that they always have, in the images below, they have one of Asriel's knockoff clothes, basically. So they'll either have, a simple long shirt, a short t-shirt, something that looks a little bit more cozy, more for warm weather, same as this one. Oh, this one at least has seems to be a button down. This one is also pretty much button down. So as you can see, even here you might already have some kind of, okay, I mean, I'm okay to choose something, but these aren't that different. And then it tells you select the legs that you prefer. And this one, I think, if by this point you're still kind of engaged and thinking, oh, this is legit, I'm creating a character from scratch, how cool, this isn't something that I've seen in Undertale or anything else Toby Fox has made, then you get to this one, and it's, wait a second, is there even any real difference between these? Of course, the answer is that yes, obviously he wouldn't have put them all the same. Like in this case, as you can see, let's say the thicker and the thinner leg are reversed compared to the other four, which is very cheeky. But other than that, yeah, they're pretty much identical. Which again, at that point you're like, okay, it's starting to get less and less certain why am I asked here to do? This is your body. Do you accept it? Oof. Now, again, what a powerful phrase to be said by, again, who we assume by, at this point at least, to be Gaster. Do you accept it? Now, the funny part is, you can say no here. It's not really gonna change anything. But it's interesting that it's basically telling you, do you accept whatever body you have chosen? And I think it's powerful here because it kind of mirrors a lot of the themes that we'll be seeing later down the road in the game around acceptance, around people accepting themselves and their body. So it's very, and with the risk of sounding like Esther, it's very, very interesting that this is something that is used so soon. So again, just to be nice, we're gonna say yes. Excellent. You have created a wonderful form. Now, let us shape its mind as your own. Let us shape its mind as your own. So here again, he's trying to make this very clear point that whatever we are trying to create here, it is meant to be kind of a transfer, a kind of way of bringing us into the game. And again, the way he tends to phrase it, it's not meant as a, immersion or a ludonarrative consonance, but it's actually meant, at least from his point of view, as a very literal, you are being transported into this world. Hence why at the start you saw the red soul and how it felt like that was the one being brought here. And now it starts asking us questions. It almost feels, honestly, as if you're taking kind of a psych exam, or a questionnaire that if you were at work, it would sound something like, oh, what color personality are you? Or who are you actually engaging with? But here, again, this is where things really start going off the rails, right? When we're still talking about a body, at least, whilst some of the choices might have been odd or on the other hand very similar, at least they kind of all, as you can see here, lead to something that makes sense. But when we get to this part, this is where it really starts to be a little bit weird, right? Like, what is its favorite food? Sweet. Classic. Makes sense. Soft. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know that many people that would describe their favorite food as soft. Maybe people that, don't have a good dental, but definitely not a way to describe your favorite foods. Sour. Okay, we're getting back to understandable things. Salty. Same. Pain. Pain. So we moved from, tastes, or at least textures in the case of soft, straight down to emotions. So we have pain and cold. Cold, ironically enough, if we didn't have pain right before, you would probably not be primed to think this one's odd. You think like, oh, cold food, so maybe they're trying to say something like ice cream, right? Haha, so funny, what a weird way to say ice cream. But after you saw pain, which is a feeling, then cold also registers as a feeling. So see how important here both the ordering and the association. Like, because we saw pain, now we're starting to question things. Now, even things that would have felt harmless before, we're already starting to get primed to be suspicious of. Now, let's not be too mean. Let's not give it pain. Let's go with something, regular. Let's say salty. Your favorite blood type. Now, again, probably if you're from Korea or Japan, this is probably something that you'll find a bit more identifying, because I know that over there it's a bit more common to at least be blood type is something that you take into account related to people. I won't say it's something like horoscope level, but it's kind of the same idea of taking certain traits of the people that aren't maybe the things you would think about at first and associating a value to them. But again, if you have even a cursory knowledge of blood types, again, you instantly see something's not okay. Like O, blood type O, completely missing. Interesting. Blood type A, okay. AB, not the order they're usually put in, because the usual order is O, A, B, AB. But okay, B, as I said, makes sense. Maybe not the order, but the fact it's here. C and D. Now this is very Again, very interesting. But the whole idea behind it is that what is Gaster doing here? He's the one that is giving us these choices. He didn't leave it like a free choice, especially the other one with the food. He could have simply left it as a text that you could type and, put whatever you wanted. But he deliberately chose it to only be a list and to only give us a few options. So again, we have to think, and we're going to assume that this isn't just a lol, wow, so random. Like everything here is at least somewhat makes sense, and even if perhaps each option by itself, like for example, the fact that here it's CD, the fact that we have a C and we have a D by itself doesn't necessarily mean something, but definitely we can at least infer some things from this. Like, is this just a cheeky, oh, haha, see, it's like the alphabet, A, B, C, D. So maybe, if we ignore A, B, it almost feels like, oh, you're choosing from a multiple choice question, but you're not actually seeing the answer. You're just choosing A, B, C, or D, and you don't know what that means. What's very interesting again is that all of these are actually recorded somewhere, because again, since hopefully you've already played the game, you know that whatever we do here does not actually influence the game as far as we know. But it is recorded. If you do take a save file and examine it, it will have a lot of information about things like how far you are into the game, what items you have, and so on. And of course, sometimes even, like what conversations you've had or what choices you've selected into a conversation. But it also does record everything you've chosen in this particular selection screen, which, by the way, again, as a funny aside, one of the things that you can notice about it, if you check the window, I have to check these on a separate screen actually, because right now it's on full screen for me and for you as well. For example, right now the name of the window is Deltarune. So deltarune.exe, and a title bar says Deltarune. But when we started the game, it was actually called Contact, in the section where it said, are we connected? So again, it's interesting how the creator of this game, which right now the, again, current theory is that it is Gaster actually. So kind of like, okay, Toby Fox obviously in the real world has made Deltarune. Nobody here is challenging that and doing a in real life horror story about it. But from a, let's say, game perspective, it's pretty clear that it's trying to imply that Gaster is the creator of the game. Even in the name of the song that we've been hearing during this entire section is called Another Hymn. So kind of, again, obviously he would not be referenced directly by name. But it does suggest that this Gaster is separate in some way from the Gaster that we knew in Undertale, because it's another him. So with all that in mind, it's pretty clear that he is trying to communicate with us in multiple ways, both the title bar of the game, both with the choices he's presenting to us now. Like, again, if we move back to it, like the fact that he used the alphabet here, as I said, could be a way of trying to be cheeky. Try to say like, look, I can do humor too. Don't worry about that whole pain option. I can do humor as well. Don't be so afraid. So let me choose something normal, so to speak, with blood type. Although again, personally, I don't have a preference for a certain blood type, to be honest. What color does it like most? This one actually has pretty normal options almost, like red, okay, the color of the soul that we're selecting things with, blue, okay, green, okay, so we already have our RGB, not in the usual order, again, interesting. So the colors that you normally use to kind of represent any color, especially on a digital screen. So, pretty standard. And then cyan. Out of all the colors that you could have chosen as top 4, so to speak, cyan. Not yellow, orange, even violet. No, cyan. again, very interesting selection, and I don't find it that weird if you take into consideration that the color that Chris's skin has in the Dark Worlds is cyan, for example. So it might be kind of a way of Chris's personality actually bleeding through in these selections. So let's actually go with that cyan, because, you know, if Chris chooses to use it as a color in Dark Worlds, it probably means something to him. Please give it a gift. Again, what an interesting choice of words. So we're not giving it a quality or anything like that, we're giving it a gift. So this is again, Gester first of all trying to make it clear to us that this is not us. This is indeed a vessel or an avatar, if you want to call it that we use in the game. And as such, it is completely different from us, so much so that we can give it a gift. You wouldn't give a gift to yourself, right? So it's, again, it's very clear this kind of delimitation that it has from it. And the options themselves are also interesting. So we have here kindness. Oh, that's really nice. A mind, which that's good, don't get me wrong, but I think more worryingly is the implication that unless you give it this, it won't have a mind, which that is very scary. So kind of suggesting that this vessel, at least at the start, doesn't have any of these 5 qualities, right? Because otherwise, why would it make you choose between them? Like, again, if you're not giving it kindness, does it mean it's going to be mean by default? If you don't give it a mind, does it mean that it's going to be mindless by default? Does it mean it doesn't have ambition, it won't be brave, or it can't even speak unless you give it the gift of a voice? And again, what is even, if you even reduce it to that, what's even more horrible? Not having a mind at all, or having a mind and not even being able to speak? So yeah, very, very interesting once more. Let us go with mind for now, because again, I really don't like the idea of creating a mindless vessel. How do you feel about your creation? It will not hear. It will not hear. How rude, almost. It's kind of suggesting that, you know, this thing has been sitting here waiting for us to basically create that. We are its creator, essentially. Gester is giving us this opportunity of shaping a vessel, and now it's kind of telling it, okay, could you go out of here for just a second? We need to discuss something about you, and we don't want you to hear. And now I need to be honest about how I feel about it. And it's interesting, like it's giving us an out, right? Like most people, if it didn't have the parentheses with "it will not hear," their first instinct would be like, "Oh, I can't say something bad." But the "it will not hear," normally it should make you feel like, "Oh, so I can be honest." But then it's like, "Oh, now I really feel bad," because the fact that it will not hear, it already humanizes it more than everything else we've done until now, because until now maybe we weren't actually concerned about its feelings, but now we are, because now we know it could technically hear, but it will not now. So even though you'd normally be like, well, maybe even if I felt something negative about it, now I feel bad because now I care about it, because it feels human, because it can hear and maybe be upset of what it hears or be happy. I think I'll choose hope for this one. Have you answered honestly? Which again is, he knows that maybe we aren't being truthful in this. He knows that maybe, just like I'm doing right now, I'm doing this here, and it doesn't really matter that much. But I'm going to say yes. You acknowledge the possibility of pain and seizure. Now, this is funny because it's put here, and again, you are, well, pain mentioned a second time, okay, and now seizure as well. Great. So the first question that you'll feel is that, well, is this pain and seizure for myself or for it? How am I connected to this vessel? If this red soul that I'm navigating here, represented at the start as the thing that appears and then is transferred to this vessel, is me, is it suggesting that my connection to it means that I might be the one that's in physical harm? Again, obviously, all we're discussing is at this theoretical game level. Obviously, it's not suggesting this would happen in real life. Although, again, if you were to play Chapter 1 as it was originally released, the installer actually does ask you at one point that you acknowledge everything that happens from now on, which again is very ominous. It's basically telling you to be responsible, to care, and to actually kind of treat it not as a game. Which again, what a way to set the mood, right? In general, for a game. What a way to set the mood. I guess I'm going to accept it because even if I say no, it won't really care about it. Understood. Name your vessel. Now, this is obviously important because it's the first time in this entire, let's say, vessel creation, or some people have called it as a gunner maker, in the sense that you're creating a gunner just like the gunners that existed in Undertale as Gaster's followers because of its monochrome outline, this kind of connection to Gaster and so on. But this is the first time we're actually given a meaningful choice in the sense of a free choice, so to speak. Which again, I'm highlighting these because one of the things that especially Chapter 1 kind of beats you over the head is this idea of a lack of choice, a lack of caring about it. So it is, again, very interesting that we are given at last a choice, which is ironic because obviously the next screen will actually show us that we did not have a choice. So again, what an interesting way of creating this dissonance right at the end. And it's not coincidental. In any other game, it would have been normal maybe to start with naming your character, or in this case, vessel, and then continuing with everything else if there was even any more options. But in fact, with this one, it's given pretty clear that they're trying to make us feel bad for not having choice, because just as we are given choice, it would then be taken away from us. Not only that, but if you choose to name your vessel one of the existing characters, it will have different reactions. For this one, I'm going to give you probably one of the more, let's say, out of the box ones. If we choose Noel. Noel. An interesting coincidence. And what about the creator? And see, again, it is making it clear we are not the vessel because we have a different name. And of course, lots of people usually tend to give characters their own name, or they have, let's say, a pseudonym that they tend to use in games like these. But again, here we will go with the same one. Noel. Of course. Of course. Of course. Of course they are the same. Noel. Thank you for your time, your answers, your wonderful creation will now be discarded. No one can choose who they are in this world. Your name is Chris. Yep. And that's what we are hit with in the first scene. just as we selected the name of our vessel and our name, and yes, if you do select the same name, that would be his response to it. Of course, it's the same name. Again, probably mocking people that tend to do that for their characters, put their own name in. Probably him being like, you're not understanding what is happening here. You are not the same thing. And just as he said that, he's going to use everything that we've created, and that then, as you can see, something else butts in, which again, at this point, this is still an actual mystery of who butts in during the end of the character creation, and you can say that they boot Gester out and say, no, we're discarding all of this. Whatever this is, it's not okay. Nobody can choose who they are in this world. And your name is actually dot dot dot. And of course, now we're transitioned to the actual game where we can see Toriel waking up Chris. And kind of by yelling their name to wake them up, it gives us this first impression of, oh, so our name is Chris, which again is an intentional kind of red herring for us to pick up on. That is not our actual name, but this is going to be the name of the person that contains the soul. And again, if you think of this from the perspective of someone that has played Undertale before, and then they see Toby shadow dropping basically an entire game on them on Halloween, several years after Undertale has been launched. And then they're treated to this screen. You can imagine their first reaction being, whoa, wait, is this like a new Undertale or a new Undertale game? That's obviously Toriel. Well, she has different clothes than before, I guess, but that's her, recognizably her, and even her portrait is in the same style as it would be in Undertale. And actually, in general, if you look at the dialogue portraits in the Light World, they are pretty much Undertale copies of that, which obviously they aren't in the Dark World. So you can see how far Toby wanted to go with this kind of alluding to people that, oh no, this is totally Undertale or something very Undertale-esque. Like, look at all the returning characters. Look at that poster of a yellow flower. I wonder what that will make you think of. You have Toriel in the middle of the screen under the Deltarune rug. So again, Chris, if you do not wake up, we will be late for school. I will wait outside for you, all right? And then we see Chris. And of course, your first reaction is, he doesn't look like the guy I created. No, he doesn't. They are their own thing. But Chris is what we're going to be controlling for the game, mostly. It's a beautiful day outside. Indeed. And this starts probably one of the first contentious subjects here related to, well, who is the narrator here? Is it Chris? I don't think that we will see how they are, but they don't seem to be the kind of person that comments how lovely the weather is. Doesn't really seem their style. And with a lot of things that are being described, you'll see a kind of alternation between third person and second person. You just never see first person, like you never see I saw this or I will not do that or something like that. But you do see the idea that, it feels like there are multiple perspectives at play with a lot of the descriptions for various places and things. And of course, like, for example, if we look, like we have here, Chris, okay, they're level 1, HP 20 of the 20. They have $2. Okay, so dollars are a thing here. They don't have any items. Their stats are just interesting. Like, definitely a lot more than you would expect if you were used to something like Undertale. Although it's interesting, we even have EXP, which again, from Undertale, that meant execution points, not experience. So it is a bit of, oh, okay, so we're still doing that. And LV was level of violence, not love, as Floey said. So again, what a very standard Undertale menu, so to speak. We do have a pencil as a weapon, and making a return from Undertale, the bandage as an armor. And yeah, once again, this time written in plain characters, money too. Which is funny, it's not dollars or gold or any other, you know, generic currency. No, it's the most genericest of generics, money. Okay. Oh, and we already started the game with a cell phone, unlike Undertale, where we had to wait for Toriel to give us one. Oh, call home. We can call home. Hello, Dream resident. Who might this be? Chris. Do not make me come over there. Click. I think it's adorable once you notice that Toriel never speaks with inflections, like she will never say don't, she'll always say do not, and so on. So it's always amusing to see that this speech quirk of hers is the same in Deltarune as well. But yeah, as I said, the menu is pretty similar. Um, but yeah, I mean, even if we look here, like already, as I said, besides all of the Undertale references starting with this huge Deltarune symbol, which makes sense. In a game called Deltarune, it kind of makes sense that one of the most prominent things we see even from the first quote unquote real scene, because obviously technically the game begins as you saw with the vessel creator scene, is the Deltarune, which again, one of the first questions that it's still kind of an open question is this, obviously it represents the angel. That much we've inferred in Undertale, and it seems to still be the case here in Deltarune as well. But it's the same idea. Is this going to be an angel of salvation or of destruction? In Undertale, that made sense because of basically how the monster underground religion was set up, right? Because for them, their whole point of existence was revolving around the fact that they are trapped underground and they need to get out of it to overcome the barrier put in place by humans. So, in their kind of mythology, it made sense why they needed this angel of salvation, or in the other sense, this angel of destruction that will simply end all monsters and also kind of be a resolution of their problems. But here in Deltarune, it's a bit more vague for now. What does the angel actually stand for? Because, yeah, I mean, obviously they have the prophecy, and the prophecy says a lot of things, including about this angel's heaven, which, again, if we were to use kind of Christian mythology, heaven is a good place. But as we'll see later, not all things necessarily keep the same in Deltarune. And even this idea of an angel's heaven isn't necessarily a good thing from what we've seen hints so far about what it is. Now, if we look here, and again, with all the context that we know, we can already tell and we know that this is Asriel's part of the room. And this is Chris's. And even from, the most cursory of glances, you can see just what a big difference there is between the two. Like there isn't even, um, any kind really of decoration on Chris's side. Like a lamp, even the lamp looks shoddy and quite sad in the colors it has. This rusted cage that we know holds the soul, because it even has the blood marks here. It's stained. See, now here's the interesting part. This one I could trust is a narration by Chris because he's intentionally leaving things out. Yes, it's stained. With what? With blood from the soul that you're going to pull out later. But, I, he's not going to comment any further because he's like, I know what kind of stain this is, but you don't have to know. So even at this early stage, he's obfuscating information whenever he has the chance. It's a red wagon with a rusty bird cage in it. Looks like it's seen quite a few crashes. Yes, from throwing the soul inside it, as we'll see at the end of chapter 1. But we don't know that yet. And again, Chris is very sparse on any kind of relevant details, so to speak. But yeah, going back to the room. So again, Spartan furnishings. Again, you have to love, again, you can tell these are his description. You'll see that Chris isn't really in the mood of talking in general with us, so, or to describe things to us. So he'll always be very matter-of-factly. Like here, clothes drawer. Yeah, we could have gathered that, but obviously, usually when you're looking for flavor text and you're used to Adobe Fox game, you're used to a lot more detail. But when it's Chris describing his own things, he'll be very sparse about it. Your bed. See, again, here it says your bed, but it's actually Chris's bed. So see this use of second and third person. But yeah, I mean, as I said, when you notice the huge disparity between the two rooms, you can tell just how much difference there is here. Like, obviously, Asriel is very good. Probably as a student, as an athlete, probably some other things as well. Like there is a lot of different cups and prizes there, and they don't look like participation trophies, as far as you can tell. And you can also tell how much he cared about decorating, like all the stars and the moons, the poster, which again, yellow flower, very funny, Toby. Haha, really appreciate it. Some more diplomas here. Defoe the frame, a lamp that doesn't look as shoddy, even an alarm clock, which again, a good sign that he probably cared about being early and on time and things. Chris, as we just saw by him being woken up by tutorial, not that interested in being timely in general. And even if you try to look under the bed, now he doesn't keep things under the bed, whereas with Asriel, you can already see that there are things under the bed. If you look inside the drawers, it says, drawers mostly empty, except for a coupon book. Every coupon is for half off a large pizza. All the coupons expired before the book's print date. Classic. Um, so obviously kind of a fake pizza coupons that weren't actually redeemable. But one, well, now it won't repeat the dialogue, but basically that dialogue that you saw is actually different. One of the few things is actually different based on your save file location. So we used the third save file, and that's what you see. If you chose, for example, the first save file, you would see a comment about a torn t-shirt from a cross-country competition, and so on. So it's, as far as I know, the only place in the game where there is any difference based on your save file, which save file are you using. It's speculation at this point if this was something that was used in early testing, although again, that begs the question, why do they need, or I guess Toby at this point, because it's chapter 1, it's mostly made by him, why at this point they needed to test for, if it does show different text depending on your save file location, which means at some point it will be significant in the future. Just food for thought. Other than that, yeah, so again, very well dressed, very well maintained part of the room. It even says, under the bed, there are CDs under it, which again shows that he had passions. With Chris's side, we don't really see any passion for anything, which already raises kind of these questions of, what drives Chris in life? What do they like to do? Now, of course, we do later found out things that they do love, things like playing the piano, for example. But it seems like a lot of, coincidentally or not, a lot of things are related to things that he does outside of his own house. So kind of like his own house is not a place where they feel they can be themselves. Interesting. And yeah, see, classical music, of course, jazz, interesting, religious ska. Now that is such an interesting addition to it. Like, why is that of all things here? And again, it raises so many interesting ideas of how Asriel, as a person actually is. Like, are they, religious, like Toriel is, for example? Or is it just a case of Toriel gave it to them and they didn't want to throw it, so they just kept it under the bed with everything else? So it's not really indicative of what they like. Do they just find ska interesting in general? It's one of those things that, again, you can have a field day thinking about the implications, but at this point in time, obviously, since Asriel at this point hasn't really appeared, we don't know yet. There's also a game console. It has one normal controller and one knockoff one. Now, this is one that, until chapter 3, again, the angle of, oh no, one of the brothers, has all the cool things, the other brother doesn't, which kind of raises the question of, was, Chris being neglected in favor of Asriel, or, did the Dreamers not really, couldn't really afford many things after Chris came into the picture, probably being adopted, and they had to, settle for things less? Or is it the consideration that maybe Ezreal was nice and actually let Chris use the normal controller and he used the knockoff one? But now, with the context of chapter 3, it does raise some very interesting questions about, well, is the knockoff controller the one that we use in the sword route in chapter 3? Yeah, it is very interesting. And of course, then we have, and also, by the way, as you can see, that's another example of text changing after multiple inspections. So that was the first inspection, the second inspection of the bed. And now it's going to loop again between them. Yeah, great. And then we have the PC, which again, let's see what it has. It's a computer desk. There are many boxes under it filled with old books. Makes sense, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one actually changes based on the chapter, so we'll see in later ones that it'll be mentions of including the fact that, there was a game that he was creating that people joke was, oh, that was Ezreal creating how Ezreal looks in Undertale in his true form. Perhaps it's obviously not ever clarified as much, so we can say with certainty, but it is an amusing consideration. Now, if you step outside the room, again, you'll see here things that are very amusing. Like a cactus. There's not much to say about it. Which is sad. We'll have an entire arc basically with this cactus up until chapter 3, where we go from, oh, it's a cactus, we don't care about it, or a cactus, the most tsundere of plants, although he doesn't really like using Japanese words, so you'll say like, oh, if only there was a word to describe that, kind of like prickly, but still wants to keep you close. And obviously in chapter 3, it gets represented in the TV world, the dark world, as being, a cactus that actually loves Chris and does care for him in its own prickly way. So it's kind of amusing, this kind of character art for a mere cactus. Then we have here, there are many books. Tales of Snails, a storybook. That's, as we know from Undertale, that's one of Toriel's favorites. That snail-loving goat. Snails do not have tails, a scientific refutations. Probably also a Toriel book. Can snails help your garden? Not really. Keeping the theme. And the signed copy of The History of Humans and Monsters by Gerson Boom. Now that's a huge right thing. Like, again, if you're exploring it for the first time in chapter 1, this is technically the next confirmation that you have of another named character from Undertale making at least an appearance. And you'll be like, oh wow, so Gerson is also in this universe. Now, obviously, we know now by chapter 4 what happened with Gerson and everything related to him, and I actually get to meet him. But it's interesting, like, again, how things like these are sprinkled in so early into the story. Like, it already imprints in us the idea of there is a Gerson boom. As we go later and also see him at the cemetery and everything. So, yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting how early he's introduced into the story. There are crayons in the drawer. The labels have long faded, and there is no green. Why is green missing out of all the crayons? That's also a thing that a lot of people have speculated about, even into theories like, oh, the green crayon is Azrael. Or, or I'll say, oh, the green crayons mean something important things. Again, we don't really know at this point, but yes, it is interesting how Rossi has a lot of green in his color palette, but I wouldn't personally jump so far as to say that means something about him and his creation, especially since we know that whatever, at this point, especially after chapter 4, we know that whatever Rossi is, he's probably not a classical darkener created just from one object. He's probably meant to be something more. Maybe either on level similar to Gerson or something like that. No, I don't personally ascribe to the one theory that says that, uh, or actually Azrael is dead and this Ralsei is his, kind of reincarnation from whatever is left from Azrael's death, but it is something that is going around, so until it's refuted or we have a clear indication of what Ralsei is, because in chapter 3 it gets taken away from us before he can say what he is. So at least he's not necessarily embarrassed to say what it is. We'll have to wait and see. Ah, yes, the classical putting the character into the mirror. Now, obviously, in this another tale made a lot of impact, especially at the end of Undertale, because it, depending if you went on the pacifist or genocide route, it kind of told you of yes, you are still yourself, or no, you've gone down a dark path. Here it says, it's only you. Only you. So I guess we aren't. And of course, you have some other doors as well, but they're locked for now, and we haven't had a chance. So yeah, let's go down and see. Yeah, so we have apparently a two-story house, which is the Dreamer residence. Here we can see a lot of the action figures that are then kind of marked in TV World once more. We can even see in the bathroom. You looked inside the sink cupboard. There's a can of Icy's Cool Boys body spray, spray for the boys, flaming hot pizza flavor. It seems to be almost entirely full. Yeah, so we can. This is one of those things where we can already see that Chris is not a typical teenager. Like they are obviously trying to reject some of the things that are being imposed on them. And there are things where it's clear that probably Toriel is being like, oh, mm, a boy your age should be using like cool boy deodorant. And Chris is pretty against that. Plus, flaming hot flavor. Yeah, maybe not the best. Flaming hot pizza flavor, probably not the best thing to be consuming. And it's interesting, right, that this is the same sink that we then use at the end of chapter 2 for nefarious reasons. But now it's, we don't even check the sink. We're just interested in the cupboard. Now, another funny thing. On the shower ledge, there's a small container of apple scented shampoo. The one to the left that you can see, it's very small, almost like a vial. And a gallon-sized container of pet shampoo. Now, for such an innocuous phrase, it does beg us some, important questions. So, okay, does that mean that, Toriel obviously as a kind of a goat monster, um, are there no products made specifically for them? They have to resort to basically using pet shampoo, like, in IRL humans use with their cats and dogs. Like, is there nothing made to cater specifically to them? That does, raise an interesting question of are monsters not, or at least monsters that have fluffy hair, aren't widespread enough for it to be worth it to have very specific products for them? Or is it just, again, Toby being funny and making kind of a commentary of, oh, they have fluffy hair, so they're probably using pet shampoo to keep their fluffy hair. Again, a funny thing to speculate, but again, at this point, since we really don't know much about hometown, except that, it's called hometown, which again is a very funny homage to, let's say, the lack of originality in how monsters, at least in Undertale, was Asgore's lack of originality that made him call it home and new home. So here calling it hometown is also kind of a fun throwback, but it does obviously not tell us pretty much anything. Now, of course, based on the, as we'll see later, the design of hometown and how it looks and everything, does kind of scream, like, um, let's say New England, US is definitely the thing it most resembles, and as far as people have said as well. But again, we don't really have any bigger context so far as to where does this fit in. Does it, resemble the Undertale universe in which, yes, there are humans, there are monsters, but they're living pretty, separate lives, even though in this one, at least, on the surface, it seems like they're living a more peaceful coexistence, somewhat. And, the fact that Chris is here as a human, does this mean that in general humans are a minority in this world, or is this the case that maybe here is actually a place where monsters are the majority, and actually in the rest of the world it's mostly humans, and, you know, that also explains why there aren't, like specific shampoo products for them. Who knows? It's a toilet. Flush it. If you actually, oh, you flush the toilet and you get the heartwarming. Do-do-do-do. Let's see if we do it again. So loud compared to everything, especially since we don't have the next piece of music yet. And if you do it a third time, Chris, is everything all right in there? And Chris turns to face us like, oh no, what did you do? Toriel was worried. But the even funnier thing, so obviously that happens if you try to flush 3 times. Probably Toriel is a bit like, oh no, did they do a number 2 in there and it's not going away. But you can continue doing this. The 5th time. And if you do it 6 times, Chris, what are you doing? You did not put a bat bomb in the toilet again, did you? Hilarious, with the implication that actually this is not the first time that Chris might have tried to do some projects in the toilet. Yeah, using bat bombs. Very naughty of him. But let's see if we try to do it even more times. Yeah, now Chris is actually turning back to us being like, oh my god, are you seriously continuing doing this? Chris, if anything bad happens, you are paying for the plumbing bill. The resignation of a parent being like, I'm not going to bust in the door because God knows what they are doing in there, but at this point, like, go ahead, kid, like you're paying the bills, obviously jokingly, I assume, but still, it's funny. And no, there's any further dialogue, but it's funny that you can do it 9 times and there's actually a separate response for each of them. It's nice again because it's a small but neat example of interaction between Chris and Toriel and how, it's clear you can already see the signs that we'll get confirmations for later of how much Chris has been a troublemaker for a lot of their life and how much at this point Toriel is already pretty much used to it in a certain way. And, still trying to not cave into it necessarily, but also kind of at this point maybe being a bit resigned to the fact that this is just something that he does from time to time. There's a photo on the fridge. It's of you, your mother, and your brother. Oh, no Asgore, as you can see here. So it's interesting that Toriel obviously only kept a photo with the 3 of them. And again, the fact that it says in the second position, it says you, your mother, and your brother. So again, this is whoever the narrator is referring to Chris's relationships. And he says that they are his mother and his brother. We don't necessarily see Chris saying this because again, really at this point in time, it's a bit complicated, right, to understand Chris's feelings towards his own family, because obviously he was adopted, and at first they kind of made him feel as integrated as they could. They even got him the horn headband to make him feel like he's also a goat. So there was even a small period probably in which he thought he was, the same as the rest of his family, and then had to come to grips with the fact that no, I am actually different. I am a human, not a goat monster. But, you know, at this point, it's a bit harder to understand just how he feels about most of his family, really, because we really don't see it. Like everyone seems to feel like, oh, obviously him and Azrael are close, but most of them are interested of Azrael through him. But we don't really know how, for example, what are Chris's feelings towards Azrael at this point, right? Is there envy there, jealousy, um, indifference? It's really hard to say at this point what are his true feelings towards his brother, because obviously from the rest of the town, everyone seems to obviously think that they are close as brothers, but we don't really have any way from Chris to know exactly if that is how he feels about him. And with Toriel as well, like especially given what happens at the end of chapter 4, it's obviously that him and Toriel don't necessarily have the greatest of relationships, and that, Toriel, even though she tries a lot, she isn't necessarily the best parent for him either. So another relationship that's not restrained. And as for him and Asgore, well, that's another can of worms where it's clear that Chris at least isn't really happy with some of the things that Asgore does in his own time. And it's again hard to understand until we know for certain what was the cause of the divorce, even though the speculation right now is a lot based on what happened to Des. But it's clear that Chris isn't really happy with his family life, that's for sure. There is some white fur stuck in the drain. Again, a nice observation that makes sense. Yep, this is a family that has goat monsters in it, so a lot of white hair is to be expected. There's some cinnamony batter caked on the stovetop. Again, what a nice way using a very banal flavor text to actually tell us a lot about how this world works. When we had a very similar stovetop in Undertale in Toriel's kitchen, there was actually a very amusing text there saying that, oh, this stovetop is very clean, probably because Toriel uses magic instead, fire magic instead for cooking. Here it really says, oh no, there's some similarly batter caked on the stovetop, so which is normal in a normal stovetop that you actually have to use because you don't have magic. So yeah, this is pretty much your first clue that you're supposed to get that this light world is, or at least the light world is different from how Undertale works, where pretty much magic is accepted as something that monsters have. Here, at least in the light world, monsters do not seem to possess magic. We haven't met, and again, all the chapters so far, a monster that's capable of doing magic in the light world. And this is one way to subtly reinforce this concept that, yeah, if she could have used magic, she would have used that instead of cooking normally, but she doesn't, so she doesn't have access to magic. And again, eh, just like Toriel doesn't have access to it, pretty much no monsters do, even though in dark worlds, any Darkner is capable of magic, and even Susie is capable of magic. Only, just like in Undertale, humans seem to be the only ones that are necessarily capable of magic. And we see Chris unable to use magic, and they don't even have a magic stack innately. So yeah, again, the power of a simple text box description. Cookie cutters for gingerbread monsters and gingerbread humans. Again, just a nice joke alluding that in a world where you do have monsters and humans, obviously they'd make gingerbread out of each other. So, gingerbread humans because that's what humans would make, and gingerbread monster because that's what monsters would make, which is nice. And again, it really makes I know it's something that we should have moved on, but I'm still irked that, apparently shampoo is something that you can't make specifically for monsters, but cookie cutters, yeah, we can make those. That's easy. So I guess some things can go into mass production here and some can't. Or I guess they didn't see the need for making other shampoo products specifically for monsters. It's a trash can. Somehow it's emitting a pleasant floral scent. Again, this is the narrator now being coy. We know why it's emitting a floral scent because that's where Toriel keeps throwing away the flowers that Asgore gives her periodically to try to win her back. And it's kind of nice, when we hear it here, it feels like, oh, they're thrown away and things. But, we'll find out in later chapters that actually, no, the flowers are thriving down there. So that's quite a funny thing of how things go. But again, a very early indication of things maybe not being great in the household. But at this point, we don't even have enough context to know, what this fluorescent represents. It's a landline phone, but you already have a cell phone. Oh, okay, thanks. No, definitely it would have been cool to let us, call other people in the town and things. But again, we understand the reason it happens. Also, another very neat detail. It's again so very deliberate. Like obviously, this is literally the chair that Toriel sits on in Undertale, and you can even tell because it's so out of palette with everything else in the house, right? Everything else is these kind of more muted muted browns, but Toriel's chair is this very vibrant brown, but also very blocky kind of feeling, which again, in the scene that it's in Undertale, makes perfect sense. Here, it kind of sticks out as sore thumb, almost reminds you of one of those old cartoons where you knew when a character is about to be animated or a piece of furniture is about to be broken or moved because it's drawn slightly differently and more vibrantly than the rest because it's a key item basically. It's Cheerio, the beloved living room chair. Yeah. So even in case you didn't realize, like again, Toby beating you with a stick over the head to be like, yeah, dummy, this is Toriel's chair from Undertale. But yeah, it's cute how in this universe even has its own name. Was this one, which again we can only suppose was maybe Asgore's. No, no description at all. Nothing needed. And of course, the eponymous TV that will become Tenna in Chapter 3. It says, it's the TV. Doesn't seem to even be plugged in anymore. Which is, again, funny. A lot of people use this as something to say, like, well, wait, in Chapter 2 it was plugged in. And it's like, oh, what, this is such a, how do you call it? A plot hole, How were they able to watch TV at the end of Chapter 2 if it wasn't even plugged in here? Like, did Chris at some point come and plug in the TV beforehand because he knew he was about to create a dark world? Speculation at this point, honestly, but yeah, it's kind of funny that it highlights, even from this first chapter, just how, let's say, unused and neglected Tenna feels probably at this point in time already. It's been so long since anyone used the TV that's not even plugged in anymore, so it's not even people ever need, like imagine that, like probably some of you have reached a point where you don't use your TVs as often, but you still keep it obviously on and ready. You pay your bills for cable TV maybe and so on. But imagine being at that point where you're not watching TV as much that you're even keeping it plugged out. Yeah, that's the level of neglect that Tenna is in at the start of the game. And yeah, just before leaving the house, very innocuously here, a book of hymns. It's a book of hymns, nothing else. But again, it's a really nice reminder of, yes, um, this is a religious household, and at least Toriel is really religious. She's part of the choir. She goes to church pretty much every chance she gets, as at least from what you've seen so far and what is suggested. And you don't get in a position where not only you're part of the choir, but the person actually organizing the choir, because she took the decision of not holding the choir in chapter 4. So that probably means that she's organizing it. So you don't get that far in without obviously being the kind of person that's very involved in church activities in general. So again, a nice nod that you have. And of course, then we have this sequence. Chris, there you are. You might still be able to make it. Chris, it is a beautiful day today, is it not? I hope it stays this way when Asriel visits next week. But I wonder, after the excitement of university, will he still enjoy coming home to this little town? Okay, before we progress with the scene, we obviously have a lot of things to discuss about what we just saw. So, as you saw, that was a very beautiful intro sequence, lovely animated, lovely soundtrack as well. The soundtrack obviously very reminiscent of the starting soundtrack of Undertale as well. Very much, a lot of the same pitches between notes on the piano and so forth. But yeah, it's again, it's so much meant. And again, if you go back when we discussed it, this when this was released for a lot of people, it felt like, oh my God, this is, a new chapter, or let's say a new adventure in the world of Undertale. Like a lot of things, including that intro sequence, is meant to basically inject you with Undertale feelings, so to speak. Like a lot of the characters that, almost all of the characters that you see are basically returning characters from Undertale, as you saw. Like you see Catty, Bratty, Frogget, of all things, although it's funny how now that we've transitioned to this kind of much more colorful, let's say, background in general for the world, Frogget kind of sticks out as a sore thumb as being, this dark and white monster by comparison. Um, but yeah, so much feeling into it, and you saw this kind of idea that, oh no, this is obviously on the surface in case it wasn't clear. Because again, if you're kind of still stuck in Undertale code, which you wouldn't be, you know, uh, mistaken, because until now that's kind of what it felt like, when you have this scene of getting into a car, actually driving in a town that's obviously, at surface level, not underground like Undertale was. It kind of is, if it wasn't clear until now, that, there's something really different here. And obviously, then you see things like Undyne being a cop, which also gives you a, oh, yeah, things are really different here. And especially at the end, you're driving towards a school and get into it, which is very reminiscent of what's shown to you to kind of be in the epilogue of Undertale, that, Torio achieved her dream of opening a school and being a headmaster. So, and obviously we'll find out later that pretty much she is the headmaster. So it definitely gives you that feeling of, oh yeah, this person, um, this actually, not only this person as in Toriel, but pretty much a lot of people here feel like they're in their, how do you call it, next stage of their lives after Undertale. It feels like that, but then obviously a lot of things aren't like that, as we'll see later. Like, I think probably the first thing that hits you the most is, whoa, okay, I mean, Asgore isn't the king anymore. He's actually a divorcee that lives alone in a flower shop that he's basically just barely keeping afloat, or even is kind of behind with rent to Carol, the mayor, which is pretty much the actual figurehead in town. Interesting. And then when we learn about Rudy, it was also technically present in Undertale through additional extra content outside of the game. But in that one, we knew that Rudy was dead. Here he's alive, but actually sick in hospital, which is so see, there's this very interesting mix of things that could have happened after Undertale, combined with things that have no way of having happened if we have to take Undertale as something that happened in the past before what we see here. So again, a lot of it is kind of meant to evoke Undertale without actually feeling like direct continuation. So again, this kind of a lot of discussion has been made in the community around, is it a alternate universe, a continuation, or a parallel universe? And of course, at this point, it does feel more of a parallel universe in the sense of, oh, if you had the same characters, but you switch things around, like the background of the world. Because again, a lot of what the characters in Undertale 2 obviously is driven by the main story, so to speak. The idea of, there was this war between monsters and humans, which led us to this entire conflict that shaped everyone's personalities, right? Like in this universe, maybe, given her personality, it makes sense why Undyne would be a cop. Obviously, she couldn't be a knight or even someone that, hunts others because there are no more children to hunt. There is this need. They aren't trapped underground anymore. But it makes sense that someone of Undyne's, personality and character, like someone who is, lawyer, loyal, very by the books, very driven by rules, very strong and protective, makes sense why she'd want to become a cop. Same with Toriel, and it makes sense that she even said as much in Undertale that actually one of her passions is, taking care of children and teaching children. So it makes sense that she'd be involved in the school. Now with Alphys, as we'll just see next. Obviously, she's not being a great teacher, but in this universe, it kind of makes sense because actually, kind of Gerson was meant to be this kind of teacher, mentor character for everyone. But after he died, kind of Alphys had to fill in his place. So it makes sense that what we're seeing now is kind of an Alphys at the start of her journey of trying to be a good teacher to others. And it makes sense because, again, her personality, kind of her introverted, socially awkward personality, it makes sense why she wouldn't be necessarily the greatest teacher ever, especially when she's still a novice at it. So, and with, the kind of the taking the mantle, quotes intended there, from Gerson. But yeah, I mean, again, that entire sequence of seeing hometown from the car, pretty much, again, direct evocation of Undertale, but also showing you enough of a difference that you are a bit concerned with what this could mean. What, still wondering what this means. But yeah, let's continue a bit with the scene. So, does everyone have a... Oh, Chris, we thought you were coming today. We're doing group projects this month. So walk around and find a partner. Okay? Okay. Yeah, and now we have this very school music playing in the background. And yeah, as we can see here, a lot of things to notice at the first glance. Like, first off, wow, a lot of teenagers. Not something that we're used to in Undertale. And actually, that's something that I failed to mention about Chris earlier. We're no longer playing a child. It's pretty clear that Chris is a teenager. And so will be pretty much everyone here in this room, even though we don't really get a chance to interact a lot with all of them. But yeah, as you can see, like, we have obviously Noelle being the closest to teacher. Makes complete sense for who she is. Birdly, same. Though not the closest. But technically the closest, I guess, for when Alphys is sitting in front of the computer. So makes sense for his personality and who he's trying to project being. Temmie, who wants to go to college still. Like, again, kind of a teenage version of the Temmie we see in Naruto. And of course, Monster Kids, Noe, Jockington, Catty, like all of these are pretty fleshed out teenagers, but even, and with the exception of Jockington, technically we've seen all of them or a variant of them in Undertale as well. So again, this room is kind of evoking that familiarity plus something new in it. One fun thing that we'll keep seeing repeated as well is kind of this lack of a precise understanding of time. Like we'll see a clock here and it'll say, you check the time. It seems to be time for class. Oh really? Oh, I didn't realize that at first. But yeah, it makes complete sense. Yes, it is time for class, obviously, but we're a bit more curious with what is the actual time. But that's not something that we'll ever really find out. Like if you were to look at the hourglass, it seems to show, the dials seem to show like 2 o'clock. That doesn't really make sense. Like what class starts at 2 o'clock, I assume in the afternoon, unless Chris has been horribly late. But yeah, a lot of things that are also funny about here, like for example, the computer's wallpaper is a rotating slideshow of nature images. Oh, and rarely an image of two buff superheroes embracing, blushing. Of course, Alphys would be into probably some very, let's say, gay romance books or comic book characters. Of course, that would be in her character. Makes complete sense for who she is. It's a bunch of roses. Well, we know where those are coming from. They're coming from Asgore, so it makes sense. Yep, we already saw that. And of course, we can interact with everyone here. Now, if we take a look at the classroom itself, you can tell that it's a bit you know, pretty standard classroom, nothing too special. You know, it's got all of the furnishings you would expect, and honestly, the students also seem like what you'd expect. Maybe not as much people staying on their phone as you'd expect. Only Kathy is doing that for now. So actually, it's pretty early class. But the one thing that's interesting is that you already noticed that 2 seats are unoccupied. So if you're paying attention, you already know that someone's probably missing, or that, you know, it's not a full class of 9 as the desk suggests, because, you know, that's pretty typical in classrooms as well. You might have a standard seating that it's not necessarily occupied by everyone equally. But yeah, this is already kind of the first indication that Susie does exist, and she'll come into view, obviously, as soon as we start choosing someone. But yeah, let's take a little talk with everyone and see how much we already see from their personality bleeding through, even through this technically first interaction in the game. Hey Chris, what's up? Did you lose your pencil again? Here, you want the candy cane one or the one with lights on it? Huh? You want to be partners? Sorry, Birdly already asked me. But I could ask Miss Alphys if we could make a group of 3. I'll ask if you're sure. Yeah, I'm sure there's someone else you can ask. Yeah, sorry, I should have spoken to Alphys first. Though it's interesting how if you speak to people directly, it already acts as if you've talking to Alphys. So first let's talk to her so we are informed about the context, in case you forgot. What? What am I watching on my phone? It's schoolwork, of course. Animated schoolwork. And hey Chris, have you chosen a partner yet? Yeah, so of course Alphys is spending her time again, probably watching anime on her phone until waiting for us to make a selection. Very typical. Don't worry, Mew Mew, you'll always be my partner. Now, of course, not even that, she's watching Mew Mew, which we'll later find out that actually she's a fan of Kissy Kissy Cutie Mew Mew 2 instead of 1, like in Undertale. And that informs a lot about either how she is now in this game, or maybe more accurately about how the game is. But yeah, so choosing a partner. Now it's interesting how, again, with Noelle, you can already tell a lot of things about how Noelle, for example, is used to Chris asking for things from her. Like, oh, what, you don't have a pencil? Look, I'll give you a pencil. So actually the fact that he comes to ask to be partners with her is a shock to her. Like she's kind of already used at this point in their relationship now to kind of act as if they're no longer, you know, that good friends anymore. But also with her, it's kind of interesting that she's always willing to help him. You can see how they still have that bond even after not being such good friends anymore. So she's still willing to be partners with Chris for this, but she's not opposed to it, even though we'll see that Birdie is intensely against it. But it's nice, you can already tell about her that she's a helpful person, that she is willing to help Chris when he needs it, but that also that, my God, is she holiday themed or not? Like obviously, even though you don't even see her face yet, like we can tell that she's a reindeer. Again, a very Christmas themed animal already. Then we see she has a Christmas sweater on her, even with the poking tail, very Christmassy. And then even the fact that she has candy cane pencils, because of course she would, like, and her name is Noel, which is French for basically Christmas, and her family name is Holiday. Like, what else do you need to know that, she's very Christmas themed? Everything about her screams this, even now at just a very cursory glance. Now again, if we speak to Birdley.
Ah, Chris, late again, I see. You need a partner. Sorry, I'm already partners with the second smartest student. Though, wait, Chris, now that I think about it, your unique skill set might help a lot on this assignment. Pfft, not. I actually want to get an A.
Yeah, again, it's funny how much of his character you can just infer from three phrases. Like, for most people, this is pretty much almost all that they'll see of Birdie until chapter 2. And, when he then appears in chapter 2, people will be like, yeah, it tracks for what we know about him so far. Like, it's very funny how much you can infer just from those 3 lines of dialogue. Like, it's obviously that he's pretty arrogant. He already considers himself the smartest in the room, which, yeah, that's a lot of arrogance on his side, and we'll later understand that a lot of it is based on his need to kind of be recognized, and the only way that he's seen so far that it works is when people recognize his intelligence, and that's why he marches so much on it. But again, here at the first glance it just feels like a lot of just arrogance without knowing if it's necessarily backed up or not. And also how easy it is for him to kind of dismiss others, like in this case Chris, and just say like, oh yeah, Chris, you wouldn't be any help. Which again, when we later found out that actually Chris is still like 3rd place in class, despite Chris obviously being the kind of person that doesn't really care about school or even arriving on time at school. It just makes sense that, Chris is still someone that has a lot of potential, and it has a lot of innate intelligence and knowledge. And I think it's funny how Bertley still demeans him, even in this case. Again, shows a lot about what he is as a person, and also how dramatic he tends to be in general with a lot of his affectations. Then of course we have Temmie.
Crisp, over, very source. Them already have partner.
Oh my God, that animation with the tail of bring out the egg.
Them partner with egg.
This is an entire thing that's very interesting right now, especially with what we know now, even from chapter 1, but even now that it's continued to be a thing in every single chapter afterwards, with, let's say, the mysterious person behind the tree each time and the eggs that we receive as such. It's so interesting how the first time you're actually presented with an egg is so soon into the game. Like, you barely make introductions with the rest of the class and you already have Temmie that has an egg on her desk. And yes, I know that in universe her name is Tem, but I can always think just to Tammy-chan because this is what she was associated with in Undertale. But with Tammy, well, again, with Tam, it's always this funny idea that yes, it still has kind of the same voice patterns and the same affectation, and yes, she's still struggling and trying really hard to get into college, which is interesting that a lot of people will say college here, but as you saw at the start, of course, that Toriel, someone that's a lot more old school and doesn't even use abbreviations, would say university. But yeah, and also that's when the first time when we get introduced to Asriel, as confirmed that it is Asriel actually in the game. But yeah, it's funny that her partner is an egg that will then lead. We also get led down this entire Easter egg path with the mysterious man behind the tree. And it's very interesting that Tem is so associated with it. What will that mean for us, later down the line, especially now that in chapter 5 we will be seeing the last egg. Yeah. Yo, Chris, show up earlier next time. I ended up having to partner with Snowy, haha. No, he keeps turning to me and saying, howdy partner, like a cowboy. Yeah, Monster Kid has definitely grown up since Undertale. Like, he is now pretty much almost a surfer bro with that accent and with the spiky hair. And still probably someone that, is pretty average in a lot of things. And also someone that still kind of likes Chris. Like as you can see, they were actually willing to be partners with Chris rather than Snowy at least. So, there is hope that Chris isn't being quite as ostracized at school as we might think based on what we've seen so far. Although again, it's so hard to tell with how little they seem to interact with a lot of the other characters before, let's say, we arrived on the scene. It definitely feels like they weren't necessarily the talkative type, as we've seen from their description as well. Yeah, moving on to Snowy. Partner? I hardly know her. Butchering the joke, Snowy, as usual. Again, not that different from how he was in Undertale, like kind of following in his father's footsteps as a comedian, but not being actually that really good at it and mostly making some really bad puns. So we're keeping that real like you, Snowy, but you need to get better at this. Ha ha ha! What you think of that one? Funny, right? No? Well, I got news for you, pal. I already got a partner. Scram. Yeah. He's, as you can see, he's just trying to fit in his own way, so it's kind of endearing, obviously, that he tries to do it via jokes, but it's also kind of painful how much his jokes don't land with others, it seems. Click, click, tap, tap. Taken. Yeah. Yeah, obviously Catty being very talkative at this point in time. And of course, everyone's favorite, Jockington. Chris, Jockington and Catty are always partners. We're the ultimate academic duo ever since our first gym class. It was hula hoop day and they ran out of hoops for us, so she used me instead. That's our origin story. We seem different, but me and Catty have a ton in common. We both like breathing and unhinging our jaws. Ugh, yeah. Obviously, Jockington is meant to kind of parody this kind of high school stereotype of, the jock or shock. Someone called Jockington being a stereotype of a jock, I know. But it's kind of funny how he's also kind of lampshaded, but at the same time, it's a bit of a deconstruction. Like he's actually a genuinely nice guy, as we'll see in general. And he's also very attached to Catty and always helpful with her. And he never bullies Chris or tries to bully anyone in general, unlike Susie, as we'll see. But yeah, I mean, honestly, he's overall, it's clear that he is indeed a jock, and the idea of um, he's pretty much, bronze, not brains. But he has a good heart, and you can tell again, even from the rest of the chapters, that he isn't necessarily, up to no good in general. Although, of course, it's very interesting, and again, it was taken so much for laughs in chapter 4 that there is a prophecy panel about him of all people. Like the fact that there are some for Susie, Chris, and Noel makes perfect sense. But for example, we don't see any related to Birdley, which in my opinion is a lot related to how the weird root influences a lot of what happens with him. So it makes sense that maybe, in case he's out of the picture, it'd be weird to have a prophecy about that. But it's interesting that of all people, Chalkington gets a prophecy panel. And it's actually one that, from what we're seeing now of the leaks for chapter 5 at least, is going to happen. He is going to grow a beard, which, that's a vibe, a snake or a worm. Probably a snake was what he's meant to represent, but with a beard. But yeah, I guess that happens. So yeah, obviously the idea is that, again, this whole section is kind of meant to represent that, pretty much everyone in the class usually kind of has their person to lean on, and Chris is kind of the odd one out. Although again, apparently if he had been on time, maybe Monster Kid would have been willing to be partners with him.
Ask elsewhere, Chris. I actually want to get an A. If you can't get anyone, maybe your mom will be your partner again.
Ooh, yeah, I forgot actually about that follow-up from Birdie. Yeah, it's kind of funny that one of the things that it suggests happens is that, we can already tell that obviously Toriel is quite an involved mother, but with Birdley's comment, it almost sounds like sometimes Toriel is really using the fact that she's the headmaster to do some things that definitely wouldn't fly from a normal parent, in the sense of literally being Chris's partner for projects. Kind of feels like she definitely feels, and from what we've seen across the chapters, that she's definitely more on the helicopter parent on one side, although again, the end of chapter 4 clearly shows that she can also sometimes be pretty neglectful. So she's definitely probably fluctuating between extremes, and most likely the divorce and the fact that Azrael is now off for college probably means that she's ping-ponging a lot, let's say, in her nurturing of Chris, that's for sure. But yeah, to go back, yeah, it's pretty clear that again, we don't even know what Monster Kid is. Can we take it face value that we would actually be partners, or is he saying that just as justification? But yeah, again, it's pretty clear that Chris is not necessarily the popular kid. I know, a shocker. But it just means that the class dynamics are such that he's now left partnerless. So the only way to really progress, of course, because we can't really leave the door or anything.
Chris, the hope is that you choose someone in the class?
Yeah, so he see again, especially now with Birdie's dialogue, actually what Elvis says makes a bit more sense. That it's a bit like, oh no, Chris, please don't go bring Toriel to be your partner again. I feel it's what she's trying to say here. So yeah, we're pretty much now kind of left with choosing to go in kind of a free-waste study group with Noel and Birdley. So do you want to be partners? And you say yes.
Okay, I'll ask. Miss Alphys, is it okay if we have a group of 3? Hey, what? No, I do not approve this. Abort! What? But Chris doesn't have a... Noel, what were you saying? She was just saying we're fine being alone. Actually, I just wanted to know if... Noel, can you please speak up? Again, sorry, I need to interrupt. It's again very interesting how we can see here how meek Noel is being, and again in her
let's say, chapter 2 kind of character arc, like how much she doesn't want to, let's say, make her opinion known, even when it's important for her. Like, it's clear that she was perfectly fine with having us as her study partner, but it's again, I guess the fear of, confronting Bertley or trying to impose her opinion is making her being meek and not actually speak up. And even Alphys, trying to coax her out of her shell is being like, oh my god, Noelle, can you please speak up? Like, again, she is so used to kind of keeping things in or not standing up for herself. And this is another example of, pretty much letting Birdley decide how things are going to go. And bam. Now we can see an example of Alphys being meek. I wonder in front of who? Oh yeah, of course, of Susie. Even the music stops. Again, very dramatic. Hi, Susie. Am I late? Oh no, you're fine. We were just uh choosing partners for the next group project, and uh Susie, you're with Chris. Mm, great. uh, Now that everyone's here, I'll write the assignment. She's not even waiting for Susie to go to her chair. Again, it's really interesting, like how we can see almost a parallel dynamic to what we just saw between Noelle and Birdley, now between Alphys and Susie. Like it's clear that even from just this entrance and the fact that the music cuts off and everything, it's clear that you have this kind of atmosphere full of tension, and it's clear that we Susie is kind of, let's say, not respected but probably feared. It's your first impression when you see her. And of course, again, based on what we later find out, yes, it's clear that until now, pretty much ever since Susie transferred here, she hasn't been able to fit in. She probably already, because of her clothes and everything, kind of distanced herself from the others. It's clear that she's probably pretty poor, especially from the flashback that we see at the start of chapter 3 when we saw her room. It's not furnished at all. Like it even makes Chris's room look, Chris's part of the room at least, look well decorated by comparison. So it's obvious that her family life is not great. Now, we don't know yet what is the situation with her parents, if indeed she even has them, because in chapter 3, she doesn't call her parents. So it's clear that even if they are in the picture, they probably don't really care about her, or at least where she sleeps or where she stays for the night. So, yeah, it's pretty clear that, her being new, her from the start by her clothing and demeanor probably put people off, and she's already probably used, and it's suggested that she's probably moved a lot, so she's probably used at this point that people don't accept her. So she represents very well that kind of cycle of, someone that doesn't fit in, uh, uses as a coping mechanism to keep people away, and then by keeping people away, she doesn't fit in, and so on and so forth. And yeah, again, your first impression here is like, oh no, here's the, there has to be a bully in the classroom, so obviously it's Susie. So your first instinct to be like, oh no. And then you can see how, from Alphys's perspective, it's like, well, I have two people that already are kind of the loners of the classroom. Let them be together for the project then, you know. There's no other variant. Though that does kind of beg the question of, well, does it mean there hasn't been a project yet since Susie has transferred? Like, is she that new to the class that they didn't? Because otherwise, probably, Alphys would have already been in a situation where she'd be like, oh no, probably nobody wants to be with Susie for a project. So, or is project something that they don't do that often? So there's been enough time between projects that one hadn't come up since she had transferred. But yeah, moving on. Uh, has anyone seen the chalk? This is the third time it's gone missing, and you all know I can't start class without some.
How about this? If no one speaks up, everyone gets in trouble. Anyone? P- Please? Hey, there might be a box in the supply closet. Miss Alphys, why don't Susie and I? Good idea, Noel. Susie, since you came in last, why don't you go get it for me? Huh, whatever. And Chris, can you go with her and make sure she actually gets it and stays out of trouble? Yeah, I won't press continue because that'll get us out of the classroom. So yeah, first to go for that conversation one more time. Yeah, again, it's as I said, it's very interesting how even Alphys is intimidated by Susie. And again, I think going back to what I said earlier, it's clear that from a lot of you know, a lot of considerations, Alphys is not yet a great teacher, obviously. And again, not really a big slight towards her because it's pretty clear that she's new to this from what we can see so far. But again, her personality doesn't necessarily help as well. And definitely, whilst her demeanor usually maybe isn't that much of an issue, like whatever she uses for a screensaver stays on her phone is her business. It's pretty clear that when she also has to handle like a problem student like Susie, she isn't, that great at it. She doesn't know how to handle her. She can't even think of how to convince Susie to do anything pretty much or even listen to her. And so her idea in this case was to, since it's obvious probably that Susie is the one stealing the chalk, and yes, literally the next scene we'll see how Susie is the one that literally resorts to eating chalk because probably her home life is so bad that she doesn't even get enough food that she resorts to eating chalk. And that's pretty much confirmed with what we see later in the Dark World as well, with how often she, gets excited about the prospect of eating, anything that's food in the Dark World, even the, top cake or the, the dark fruit and so on. And it's kind of a bonding experience for her, actually, with Lancer when he offers to get food for her. So you can tell how much she values food in general. But yeah, it's pretty clear that at this point, that Alphys simply doesn't know how to control her and doesn't know how to impose her point of view. Even her meek kind of attempt at, oh, you better tell me who took the chalk, and otherwise everyone gets in trouble. Like nobody, and especially Susie, doesn't get fooled for it. Like they know she's too soft to do anything more concrete about it. Also, an aside, it's funny how, again, with future knowledge, how much and especially with the extra knowledge outside of the games, just how much and for how long, Noel has been interested in Susie, and even now being like, oh, you can send me and Susie to get a chalk. Like again, it's very artfully crafted that it feels natural without any kind of romantic connotation at this point in the game, because again, from what little you've spoken to Noel, and Noel is technically the single person that you'll mandatorily speak to at least to advance the game. So you already kind of have an idea of her character and feel like, oh, she's kind of the teacher's pet. She's the kind of person that would probably go get a chalk, obviously. But, with all the concept we have, it's obvious that this was another attempt of Noel to try to get close to Susie. And, in the context where it's just the two of them, and maybe anything will happen. And it's funny how, based on Noel's personality, she's all of the things that for other people about Susie would scream, like stay away from her. For Noel, those are exactly the kind of things that make her attracted to her. The fact that she's kind of this badass loner that sounds also a bit scary, and Noel is because of all of her past experiences and some of them traumatic, we assume based with this that she actually finds scary stuff exciting. So the fact that, Susie in general as a person sounds scary is actually very interesting to her. And this is, another opportunity for her to try to get close. But obviously, Alphys, who probably is also obviously unaware of that, to be fair, most are at this point in the story.
is immediately like, oh, Chris, like you're going to be our partner anyways, and after, and it's funny that she even delegates to Chris, like, make sure she stays out of trouble. Like, even the idea that she feels that Chris is better suited than her to, watch after Susie is kind of funny at this point in the story.
Thanks, Chris. See you later.
Yeah, okay. Uh, Not much would change now, but yeah, obviously everyone now has something to say about what just happened. But first, let's go examine just what is Alphys keeping here in the corner. Looks like motivational quotes from various literature. Try your best, Astrowolf, even in your darkest hour. That one seems to be from a video game. Yeah, people said that this sounds very similar to something that you find in the Star Fox video games, which again just shows again how much of a nerd Alphys is. Some things don't change, as I said, from Undertale to Deltarune, but also it's kind of funny that it kind of dates it a little bit since Star Fox in general are somewhat old games, so it does kind of give the game a slight, as again, both Deltarune and Undertale almost take pride in the fact that they are very nondescript in their, let's say, timeline and exact time that these are happening. Like a lot, we'll see here as well. There's a lot of anachronisms related to the technology and things that would normally, like, we have smartphones, so that already technically puts this game quite a bit older than the Star Fox games, for example. But obviously the computers still look pretty jank. But then again, they, all of these that we see are pretty much school computers, so it makes sense that this being, like public infrastructures, it's slightly older maybe than what is the standard around. Hence why we see, that for example, the what Carol donated to the library and what Chris and Noel were using to play with is a laptop, which is already, more newer technology than these kind of CRT screens that we see here.
Chris, what's the holdup? Go out there.
Yeah, like Alphys is just antsy for us to go.
Don't worry, Chris. I've always thought Susie can't be so bad. I'm sure everything will turn out fine.
Which, yeah, again, first off, Noel simping hard for Susie and being like, oh, under all of that tough exterior, I'm sure she's nice, in the sense that, I want her. But also the fact that one of the things that people, especially now with Chapter 4, have speculated was like, what is the deal, right? Because as you'll see, we'll go up until we enter Dark World, because that's where we're going to have a save point. But one of the things that we do notice is just how much this factors into everything, right? Like we have Chris and Susie going to the school closet that contains the Dark Fountain, or I'll say his world, basically, Dark World, and they get locked in there by someone. We still don't know who. It could be the knight, it could be an accomplice, it literally could have been anyone that, saw an open closet, but probably not Elphys, because, she was still waiting for us to come up until school finished, because she was that terrified. So that probably excludes her from the list. But other than that, yeah, obviously at this point we still don't have enough to know who was there to do that. But it does feel like a lot of people joked and pointed out, like, if Alphys wasn't that dense, or if Alphys had actually listened to Noel, perhaps Noel and Susie would have been the ones to go into the dark world. So already there is kind of this thing of, how do we interpret the prophecy? How do we know which are the three people that are actually in the prophecy, since there's some things that don't seem to line up? What if actually Chris and Noel were the ones that should have gone into the Dark Fountain? Because then you would have had, the cage, the sword, and the prince, Dark Prince. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of speculation about how different things would have gone. Again, unless you believe that, whatever the prophet said is kind of set in stone, and actually, all of these what ifs don't make sense, because again, are we supposed to actually take to truth? Because that's the whole thing, right? Going back to main themes. Is this game meant to be of showing a world where choices don't matter, where you kind of go through all of this effort, through all of these permutations that at first are invisible, right? Like the weird route or everything else, does it actually take us to the same one ending no matter what we do? And that's kind of the point that unlike Undertale that showed kind of two very different endings and a lot of neutral endings and a lot of permutations, is Deltarune this kind of point about what if you had a game where there was literally no choice, which actually is more in line with most linear games, so to speak, that they tend to not really have a lot of choice in the end because of how difficult it is to kind of account for that. Chris, didn't I say being late was a bad idea? Hmm, it's almost as if you should have, as they say, listened. Ah, the arrogance of Birdie. Yeah, sorry, but yeah, that's basically my thoughts so far on that. It's a lot to take in, and we'll keep obviously revisiting the topic of let's say agency in the world of Deltarune and how much the game kind of again walks this fine line between trying to show that there is choice, but also that there isn't choice, that things do matter and some things don't. Sue's very mean, said Egg. Never hatch. Yeah, this one is funny because again in chapter 2 we get confirmation that actually Susie was very confused by Tammy having an egg that she claims will hatch, and she was like, but it's a boiled egg. So she was searching the internet for can boiled eggs hatch or not, and probably after finding out that they don't, came back to Tam and told her like, oh, you stupid, like that egg will never hatch. Yo, Chris, I'm sorry. If I had just waited to be your partner, you wouldn't have to be hers. She's gonna pound you to pieces, Chris, and then kick the butts of all those little pieces. Yeah, so again, in case you weren't sure at this point, if Susie is kind of a bully or at least is feared by people, like now, literally pretty much everyone except for Noel, which again, with hindsight, we know is simping Susie hard. Pretty much everyone else is not really a fan of Susie so far. Chris, don't listen to him. It's not that bad. You'll probably survive Susie beating you up. You're just gonna fail when she doesn't do any of your project. It's like we always say, Chris. You Suze, you lose. Uh, that's not very reassuring, huh? See, like he actually did a good joke for once. You Suze, you lose. But he actually then realized, like, oh, I did a good job, but I'm actually failing at endearing Chris to me. Whoops. But again, another person that was like, let's not be dramatic. Susie is just, not also a bully, but she's also pretty much bad at school, so you probably failed the project. Yay. Chris, if I had arms, I would take off this cool hat in remembrance of you. Yeah, Jockington also being very critical of our chances. Don't die. Oh, see, so she does care. And again, obviously, we find out later that, Kathy and Chris do have a history, at least in the occult, so it makes sense that she cares at least enough about him that she's like, don't die with Susie out there. And yeah, Susie eating the chalk. Okay, before I let her, I find it interesting that, she pulls out the chalk to eat and eats it, and then, is smug about it and be like, haha, I ate the chalk, and turns back. And when she notices Chris, even her, like surprise reaction of, oh no, someone saw me eating the chalk, it's literally the same graphic and sound as an Undertale. Like, again, how many little things could Toby put in to make this feel like, oh no, this is very Undertale coded and this is very much, again, is it a mix of, again, trying to mislead people and also reusing assets and sounds because it helps with development? Probably. Let's not get too high with the praises, but it's again the kind of small detail that unless you've played Undertale, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's just a generic surprise sound. But if you play Undertale, you're like, oh wow, even that's a thing that has crept through. Chris, didn't see you there. Hey, you didn't see anything just now, did you? Hmm, you can't even say. Chris, hey, let me tell you a secret. Quiet people piss me off. And again, it's so lovely done. Like you can see how Chris starts to back slowly from her in fear. By himself, by the way. That wasn't me trying to be um, in the mood. It was Chris doing it by himself. And this is again probably one of the first instances, but we'll see plenty of them all across the chapters of Chris doing things without any input from us, the player. And that is one. So again, it's a good way to show, because again, with Chris, they don't speak in general, or even when they do, it's usually by choosing one of the options that we give them. So they very rarely, if ever, speak by themselves, which again, let me remind you a little bit at the start when I said, they told us to choose a vessel. And even one of the things said if it has a voice. And it's kind of funny that now that we're, let's say, in parentheses, inhabiting Chris, or at least living inside of him, Chris doesn't really have a voice unless we let him have one. So, yeah, very interesting. But yeah, so he chooses by his own volition without any controller input to start moving backwards. So at this point in time, at least, that lets us know, which again, in a rare occasion for us to know what Chris actually thinks about things or people, that he is also scared of Susie. He realizes that she's coming here with not such a great, let's say, mindset, and he is already afraid of what's going to happen next, and he starts backing away. And of course, for Susie, her first idea, was, oh, um, hey, let's try. The first idea was, let's try it non-violently. Like I'll just, make it an innuendo. Like, oh, you saw nothing, Chris, about this, and that should be enough, right? Like people already fear me. Like if I tell you to just, shut up about this and not mention that I ate the chalk to Alphys, like it's all good. But again, Chris doesn't talk unless we are given a prompt to let him talk. So he doesn't talk. And of course, based on what we see later about Susie, at least until now, for her, quiet people piss her off. Now, funnily enough, I wouldn't say that until now we've really gotten a very clear answer about why is this something that's so particularly triggering for her. But again, going by what she then also says in chapter 3 about, she hates not being told the whole deal. I'm going to go on a limb and say, and again, maybe we'll get confirmation in chapter 5 or later, that for Susie, some of her family trauma, or at least trauma growing up, is probably related to, being kept in the dark, which again, pun intended. Uh, but the idea, of Susie, maybe when she was growing up, her parents didn't tell her why they kept having to move, so many times into so many schools. Why were they so poor? Or, any number of other things where probably she was frustrated that she wasn't given the full context of what's happening to her life, and also the loss of control in general. You have to imagine that as a child growing up that has to keep moving at so many schools and feel out of place and things, it feels very unempowering. So it makes sense kind of that her persona has kind of evolved into this mixture of a bully and also social outcast that almost revels in the little control that she has, for example, in moments like these where she can be like, hey, I can't And that probably that's why when Chris, in a way, in parentheses, disobeys her, she kind of issued him a clear thing, like you won't tell anyone that you saw me eat the chalk. But Chris doesn't say anything. So for her, that pisses off on two ways. It's this idea of, again, people being quiet and not being honest with her, or at least, communicating. And this idea of, I was supposed to be in control. You were supposed to obey me, and you chose not to. I mean, yeah, this takes her to, you think just cause you don't say anything, I can tell exactly what you're thinking. And of course, again, now Susie's going to, in the next paragraph, kind of do what we would call projection, right? Like that's the whole point. She doesn't actually know what Chris is thinking, obviously, so she's just going to project what she would do in his place in the same situation. So again, this is not us learning about how Chris is like, we're actually learning about how Susie is like and how she thinks. It's over. I caught Susie eating all the chalk. This was her last chance. Now she'll finally be expelled. Haha, come on, Chris. Don't act shocked. You know it's true. Everyone's waiting for it. Everyone wants it. So, congrats, Chris. You got me. I'm done for. Obviously, being very sarcastic. Just let me say one little thing. Seems like a waste to get expelled just for having a snack. So, Chris, if I know you're gonna pull the trigger, heh heh heh, why don't I just get expelled for some real carnage? Chris, how do you feel about losing your face? Nah, yeah. So again, as I said, paying attention to the dialogue is very interesting to find out more about Susie, not about Chris, because it was all projection from her side. So from Susie's side, it was more of a, yeah, that's what people would do. That's how people see me. They're happy to see me go. They're happy to make sure I get expelled. And again, from her side, it's almost as if she's daring them to actually do it. It's almost, again, like she's being self-destructive in a way with her behavior, right? Like, again, it's almost as if she's so tired at this point of being moved from school to school that now she's almost relishing the idea of for once making sure that this time she's leaving a school because she was the one to engender it, not her parents. So it's very interesting, you know, how she sees the world and how people treat her, or at least want to treat her. Like she thinks people are going to treat her badly. Again, that's her first idea, and she's reinforcing it with any chance she gets. That's usually how people end up and kind of stuck in their personality, so to speak, in the sense that it's hard to see her change at this point in time because from her perspective, everything that she does is just reinforcing her view of others. And obviously the others' reactions just reinforce that however she thinks of them is true. And again, at this point, honestly, we really don't know at Chris at this point in the story without any development on their side if they actually would have been the kind of person that would have told about Susie. It's to be honest, it feels kind of unlikely from their side, but it is interesting to think that maybe they wouldn't have acted if Susie had said and what effect they might have had otherwise. But of course, in practice, we know what happens. They actually end up bonding together for their adventure in the dark world, and that's what makes them, actually want and care for each other. But of course, also we now know why Susie stops that second. It's not some, necessarily at this point in time kindness from her side or any kind of feeling that, Chris deserves it. It's just because we now know that Toriel actually helped Susie when she was feeling sad when she first moved into this town. Toriel was and probably is at this point in time at least, maybe the only person that showed her genuine kindness, actually cared for her, and also took her to the diner, gave her food. And again, we've seen with her relationship with Lancer as well, just how important it is, and with Ralsei, just how much, just how much um, caring for her and actually giving her food is important to Susie. Because again, it seems like her home life is so miserable that even something as basic as, being nurtured and fed is not being accomplished. So the fact that a complete stranger like Toriel did that for her was very important. It was so important to Susie that it even makes her not want to actually hurt Chris for real. Like it makes her stop and think, Toriel was nice to me. I wouldn't like someone, that was so nice to have to well, obviously she's being dramatic, bury her own son. Probably she wouldn't have gone so far anyways, because again, from what we see later as well, like yes, she's being a bully, but she's being more of a bully because she thinks that's her coping mechanism to keep people away. So it's highly doubtful that she's actually, sociopathic in any way, or is actually kind of person that would murder someone regardless of the occasion. For her, it's just more of a mask that she adopts around others to keep her safe. Right. Nah, Chris, you've got a good mother. It'd be a shame to make her bury her child. All right, let's get this over with. We'll get more chalk. Mosey back to class. And then, Chris, sorry, one thing I need to remark while it's still on the screen. Um, Obviously, we already discussed this part, discussing with, Toriel. But it's interesting, and one of the things that others have correctly remarked so far, it's interesting a bit that there are several clues that show that Susie isn't from around here, right? Like, again, we probably would have guessed this anyways, and we get, again, more confirmation from it in later chapters, especially chapter 4. But even from here, like, the fact that she uses words like Mosey, that's not a very, let's say, New England accent as well. And then we'll see later how she calls the drinking fountain as well. Um, yeah, the actual word actually escapes me right now, but basically she also uses a word that's not very common, very pretty regional to describe it. So yeah, it's it's nice how you already have these kind of small nuggets to let you know that yeah, Susie is also probably having a hard time adapting because she literally isn't from the region as well. And then, Chris, you'll do our project. How's that sound? Uh, don't bother answering. Yeah, yeah, this is also a very interesting scene because this is basically the first time that we can notice that we are supposedly given a choice and then choice is taken away from us. Reminds you of something, like the opening, like we're going to see also others in the future. But it's interesting that unlike the first one, where we still don't really know yet who was the person that interrupted Gaster from the work he was doing with the vessel, and thus took that choice away from us of having a custom vessel. In this case, it's Susie, the one that's stopping us from having a choice. And again, it's not coincidental. And by the way, I think it's been tested already. You can't have time to answer that anyways. Like again, it really is a fake choice. Like it's not just oh, you need to move fast. No, you just can't answer that one and give an answer to Susie. And as she says, don't bother answering. Yeah. So again, it's interesting how Susie kind of illustrates, in the beginning at least, this kind of concept of not having a choice and stopping us from having a choice. Even though later, as we'll see, even including chapter 4, it's also an arc for Susie to learn and understand the idea of being able to make choices and meaningful choices. Because again, in a way, her character so far has kind of been blocked to making the same bad choices about, her school life, her being able to make friends or not, and so far because of her past. And and again, this will be is one of the main themes, is this idea of being able to make choices or not. Don't bother answering. If you haven't gotten it by now, and okay, again, it feels very much like the game speaking to us, not just Susie speaking to Chris. Your choices don't matter. So again, this feeling of, oh no, wait, again, casual Undertale fan playing this for the first time. What do you mean my choices don't matter? I just played a game. Well, I played, your game before, Toby, and it was all about making choices, and the whole point was always choosing to do good or to do bad. But at least, or sometimes doing one of the two, but at least I had always had a choice. What do you mean my choices don't matter? Let's go, freak. Yeah, and just like that, Chris picks up because technically, except for being shoved almost into a locker or at least to the wall of a locker, Susie didn't actually hurt him, so he's back up on his feet. But it's interesting, right? Like, can we go in? You look through the frosted window. A blurry yellow object is teaching a bunch of blurry bored-looking objects. Yeah, it's funny how, you can recognize Alphys, but you can also recognize everyone else is bored even through a frosted glass window. That's funny. Also, all of these lockers have something about them. The locker is locked. The locker's lock is locked. The lock's locker is locked. The locker's lock's locker is locked. The locker is covered in Jockton memorabilia. Whoa. Yeah. So adding the gag of, you know, again, Toby kind of getting out of the game and telling you like, hey Bozo, these lockers are locked, don't worry about them, you can access them. But then you also have one that's full of Joctino memorabilia, which also includes like blue hearts for some reason and probably some socks. Are you ready for the Sadie Hawkman's dance? At this dance, all the chaperones wear giant hawk heads and screech at any students that make contact while dancing. Yeah, this is one of those interesting things, which again kind of shows how much this is like a typical high school, like a high school that also has dances, but also this also idea of yeah, this is a high school, but it's also a high school that, like many other things that you can see in town and also about Torian things, also is pretty religious. Like, it's a pretty conservative high school and by extension town. Like, okay, you can have, like dances at school, but they're, very highly monitored and things, and the students are allowed to touch each other. So it's kind of this, it gives us this kind of puritanical small town religious vibes, right? Like this is the idea, and this makes even more clear the idea that maybe Chris again has troubles fitting in this kind of environment. It also might explain why maybe a lot of things are kind of hard in general. As you can see, Susie tries to go up. If you try to leave, yeah, Chris, you just gonna skip school? What, am I supposed to snitch on you? That'd be rich, huh? Nah, I wouldn't. Get back here. Chris, if you skip school, your mom will have a heart attack. Yeah, so again, it's interesting that even after the last scene, we kind of have a reinforcement. It's again Susie stopping us from really having a choice, so to speak. We can't leave the school because Susie stops us from leaving the school because she's paying attention to us and what we're doing. And it's also, again, kind of another confirmation of just how much, Toriel is kind of like this very buttoned down and orderly person that, for her, the fact, even the mere concept of Chris skipping class is, will give her a heart attack. Again, obviously dramatization, but kind of the spirit is there and it's something that we see in Toriel as a person. She is the kind of person that um, anything else excluded, she does care a lot about Chris's education and wouldn't approve of them being the kind of person that would skip school. That makes perfect sense. Chris, what? Realized the baby classroom was a better fit for you? Hey, actually, I should come with you. Maybe I find a better partner in there. Nah, actually, let's not. Wrong way, Chris. Yeah, so again, Susie says that because we know that there's going to be the classroom where probably Toriel, well, probably we know that that's where Toriel teaches this probably the let's say first grades of school, and yeah, is Susie making some snide comments about us belonging there? God, can you walk any slower or what? Nah, I get it. Not used to walking around without someone holding your hand. Come on, freak. Again, again, it's funny how much Susie just confirms again all of the hand holding and kind of helicopter parenting side of Toriel, because it definitely feels like at least at school, Toriel is moving more towards that spectrum with Chris, and it's something that is not just, probably not welcomed by Chris, but is also observed by others. Like, again, we're going to assume that Susie particularly is, paying attention to Toriel because Toriel helped her in the past, but even I assume that, Alphys and everyone else commenting on it also means that everyone is pretty aware of what Toriel is doing. And they probably have, you know, their own opinions about Chris based on this. Like they probably have a reaction to the fact that Chris is being coddled so much by Toriel and probably not being left to be their own person. And it's probably negatively affected their perception of him, well, them as a person as well. So it's interesting how much this is being observed and commented on by Susie in this as well. Like they even say like, oh, Chris isn't even really capable of doing much on their own without Toriel there to guide them, which again is meant to be derogatory. Obviously, Chris is not suffering of anything to make them not be able to act by themselves, but it does kind of show how much of their life has probably been on kind of autopilot until now, and it shows as the later how much the fact that we as the player are, engaged and trying to speak to everyone because we're invested because we know these many of these characters from Undertale, or even if they're new characters, we want to learn more about them, and then we can tell from their reactions that they're not used to Chris being the kind of person that interacts with others as much as they do. Well, here's the closet. Too bad. We were just starting to have fun. Very ironic given what's about to start, and again, very much a nod to the player as well. See, notice here how both Chris and Susie back off. So again, this is also Chris backing off by themselves without any input from us. So regardless of what we then later find out about Chris and how much they're probably involved in everything related to the Dark Worlds, there is still a part of them that's a bit scared of them. Like, that is his reaction initially, which is very interesting, again, given what we know about Chris and how much they're involved on this on an active way. Like, maybe they had plans beforehand and they knew what to expect from a dark world, but it's pretty clear that this might be the first time they actually had to step into one, and they were probably pretty apprehensive about it. They were doing it because, they made a promise, not because they actually want to do it. And it's just experience. You can even tell from Susie's sprite how unnerving she finds it as well. So it's clear that even from this point in time and from their distance, the Dark World is having enough of an effect that it can be, distinguished from just bland darkness, so to speak. Hey, Chris, is it me or is it
really dark in there. What's the holdup, Chris? Are you gonna go in or what? Yeah, Chris really doesn't want to go in. Fine, if you're gonna be a wimp, then we'll both go in at the same time. Yeah, see, as I said, it's clear that so much of this, of Susie being kind of this tough person, is a facade, because in this kind of situation where it's something unknown and scary, she does crack, and she is a bit like, oh, I don't want to do this alone. I'd rather Chris come with me. Like, she is on a mission, but she's not comfortable either. And again, even though she tries to hide it unsuccessfully, it's pretty clear that she's unnerved by it as well. See? Why are you so scared? There's nothing in here but old papers. Let's try to find a light switch. Chris, if you leave me here, I'll... Yeah, so again, once again, Susie takes away any choice from us. Like, we can't leave from here by ourselves. Pretty selfish, but again, I think given what we know so far about Chris and Susie, I don't think it would be that shocking if Chris was on his own. He would have chosen to leave at this point. But again, we know that probably they want for this to happen in some way, even though they're scared of it. They want to go into the dark world, so it kind of makes sense. And again, it's interesting. Like, it's clear that this is meant to be kind of a supply closet. But what kind of supply closet? Was it really just for writing supplies? So things like chalks, pens, maybe paper, like we see here strewn across. Like, even if you look at the symbols, honestly, it looks a lot like the quill symbol. Which again, now with the info that we have from Chapter 4 and with the trailer for Chapter 5, it's again a very interesting usage of this symbol, because again, are we suggesting that this is the place that will help us achieve this white pen of hope, or what is the point of this? That's weird. I can't find a switch. Guess it's further in. Again, can't leave even if you wanted to. And yes, it's interesting how, again, this is gonna be one of the pivotal actions that spur everything off, right? Someone actually closes the room, which basically makes it all enclosed and makes the appearance of the dark world possible. Kind of big for a closet, huh? You'd think we'd have reached the end by now. Again, we're still close to the entrance, but yeah, you can see how already the fact that there's dark world here influences the space and everything. Hey, Chris, I think this closet's broken. There aren't any walls. Well, we've worked hard enough. If Alphys wants chalk so bad, she can get it herself. Let's split. What the? Yep, the eponymous closing of the closet. Which is also funny because again, all the closet jokes abound related to this, right? And it's a very interesting idea that's been perpetrated before of, kind of Susie and Chris going into a dark world where they both can be more of themselves, like Chris having clothing that finally, represents how they actually feel, and Susie kind of actually being able to show off this kind of badass persona and being able to freely do what she wants. It's a very good analogy that I think is we'll find out is probably not just a coincidence. Oh, what the? Hey, this isn't funny. Let us out. Let us. Hmm? The floor. It's.
Yeah, so that's how we ended up in the Dark World. It's interesting how this time it's almost so undignified, right? Like, especially since it's the first time for both of them, they are not expecting it, they weren't prepared for it. You can see how in the small animation, Susie pretty much is trying to hold on to something, and this is how it falls. It seems otherwise, Chris actually feels like he's just falling on his back, almost very accepting of what's happening, but also kind of uncaring, which is obviously a very big difference from how they're going to react from now on, especially even starting from the chapter 2 Dark World, where they're entering almost willingly and defiantly into it. This one was very undignified as their first experience. And yeah, just as I mentioned before, like you can see now that how different Chris already looks compared to their Lightworld counterpart. Like you can already see kind of like this, almost like Fred from Scooby-Doo, kind of like this panache going from his neck, this knightly armor, but also kind of like this cyan. Again, going back to what we chose at the beginning. And no, by the way, there is no connection. It's always cyan. But it's interesting, right? How his entire clothing and even coloring scheme changes. Like Chris is the only one whose colors change, skin color changes in the Dark World, actually, if you think about it, except for Chapter 4, where it makes more sense because we have multiple people creating Dark Worlds. But, or let's say the original, or the Knight at least, when they create Dark Fountain, this is always how they view Chris as in these Dark Worlds. So they adopt this skin color, which is consistent. And if we look, yeah, this is where we have our first indication that, we're not in Kansas anymore, or at least we're not in Undertale world anymore, because now the menu is completely different. By the way, in case you were curious, like we didn't even have, you know, a menu until now. For that entire sequence, we didn't even have a menu to control the volume. I've controlled it separately until now. Even simple things like, if we have full screen, if we have auto run, things like that, like all of that wasn't even accessible to us until now. So it's like the light world is a different layer. And that's actually one of the most popular theories out there called the device theory. Talks a lot about these kind of differences between what we feel is like the outer layer, outermost layer, which is that menu that we selected at the start, right, to start a save that felt like a completely different program, almost like a device, and a lot of things associated with it are treated differently in the game code and are all uppercase. And then we have obviously the light world that has, an Undertale style menu and all things like that. It doesn't even have, like the actual game menu and things. You can't even save, by the way. That's why you haven't even saved until now, because it wasn't a possibility. And obviously, then we have the Dark Worlds. And once we reach chapter 3, we'll also see kind of like the sword road that's inside of that. So it's kind of all this Matryoshka doll almost of games within games, each of them with a different interface, different perspectives, and different menus. And it all kind of leads to this idea of, another big team that's going to be part of the game is kind of this worlds that are connected between each other, but that also have marked difference between them. But yeah, now you can see we have our cell phone. Okay, well, that's one thing that survived us falling down here. Let's try to use it. You try to call on the cell phone, but it doesn't seem to be working. And that's all you'll ever hear from the cell phone whilst you're in the dark world, which again, people have tried to engage with the sound and try to manipulate it and reverse it. And the most people have been able to do is that it also kind of sounds like some of Gester's team in it as well. So again, if you needed even more let's say, evidence to feel like this might be a world that is connected to or created by Gaster. That's another good thing. Equipment. Now you can see we actually have space for multiple characters. That will be obviously for Susie and Ralsei, or we're going to have Noel in the second chapter and so on, or sometimes just ourselves. Already a market difference, obviously, since we've been used in Undertale to just have one single character. Now we see that we have Chris that has 10 attack and 2 defense, unlike their 10-10 in the Light World, and 0 magic. And they also have a wood blade, a wooden practice blade with a carbon reinforced core, which again is a cheeky way of saying, yes, this was a pencil in the real world, and now it's been converted into a wood blade in the dark world, because again, that's the whole point of the dark world, that it takes kind of like mundane or simple objects and converts them into something more. So it's again this kind of, each world is kind of a expansion of the other. You start with a bare bones save load menu, then you load into a rich but still kind of confined light world. But then each room, or at least until now, each room in which a dark world has been created takes you to another entirely rich world using some of the objects that were present in the room in which Dark Fountain was created. So this kind of magnifying as you go deeper, pretty much concept. Yeah, and then we look at us. We are level 1 human. Body contains a human soul. And we do have some guts. So we got that going for us, which is nice. But yeah, again, very, very interesting. And you'll see that all across the game, this is going to keep modifying, right? Yeah, this kind of description of what we are and our level. And interestingly enough, unlike Undertale, our levels do increase pretty much linearly across the story. So with each chapter, we're going to keep increasing in level. At least that has been the trend so far. So it does kind of disprove the fact that this is just a straight up continuation from Undertale, in which, you're increasing in LV is just increase in level of violence, so it just shows how much you've killed and how desensitized that has made you. Whereas here it does seem that level is the more traditional, let's say RPG style. No, you've become just stronger from the adventures you've been through. Yeah. And this part, right, this has been a kind of a common theme, at least in the chapters so far, where at the start you kind of have this more empty area. Like again, based on the soundtrack, this is called the cliffs. So this is kind of the more unformed area where your imagination hasn't yet really started creating the world in earnest as much. So things still look a bit barren and empty, or they really haven't had the influence of something to give it more. Just like how in TV World, pretty much what we are confirmed is that Tenna is the one that kind of made TV World the way it is, and only the unformed parts at the end are kind of the ones that Tenna hasn't had any influence over. And here we see indeed our first save point. Notice how this time it's yellow, I mean it's white, unlike the yellow ones, yellow stars in Undertale, but obviously they serve the same purpose. And it's very interesting how later on we'll see them being a recurring motif, especially on the Guardian at the end of chapter 4, kind of the Titan, and in other things as well. Like this kind of idea of, what is the power of this kind of stars, what they represent for us. And also, when you first save, at times you see it flickering. The light only you can see. So only we can see these. By second nature, you reach out and now you'll see that it says here that, oh, this was Chris's save file at level 1. But now when we save, now it's Noel's, or however we chose to name ourselves. So it feels like, again, it is used to be Chris's, but now actually we've taken over completely. Or at least in the sense that now we're the ones that save. Probably Chris never even knew he had the power to save until now, and hence load. Of course, that's something that in Undertale is used diegetically within the game. The concept of saving and loading being the, let's say, power of whoever is the strongest being at that point in the game. But it's interesting that here it says that only we can see that light, and even though Chris, by second nature, knows of this, he can't. We have taken over this power from him. And with that, we'll put a pin in for today. I think this is a natural place to stop. I hope you've all enjoyed this first chapter, the deep dive. And yes, if you think that, wow, it took them almost 3 hours just to reach the Dark World, oh yes, I think this is going to be kind of the rhythm that you're going to expect with these deep dives, because that's the whole point. That there'll probably be things where we go really in depth, as you've seen, and that's how I like to keep it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, where I'll be streaming chapter 5 as well as it drops. So excited for that. Hope to see you there as well. Have a great day. Cheers.